I'm Malcolm Butler. I am a Foreign Service officer who served in state OMB on international stuff, the National Security Council, and then AID, where I spent most of my career. Stop?
Stop, and
No.
however you want to phrase your, the DC aspect of what she just said.
Okay.
I want to add on to.
Yeah. I'm married to Tish Butler, who has separately described her experiences at the bombing of the embassy in Beirut. As she mentioned, I left for consultations in Washington one day before the bombing of the embassy, 2 days before the bombing of the embassy. And I was staying in that little hotel where everybody stays across from the State Department, just north across Virginia Avenue. And I got a call very early in the morning from someone in the operations center. And they said, can you get over here right away? And I said, well, can you, I didn't understand. I didn't know anything. Oh, you don't know, you haven't heard. No, I haven't. Well, there's been a bombing at the embassy. We'd like you to come over just as quickly as you can because you know the layout of the building and we need some people who can help us get through this and find out where the damage is, and just your first-hand experience would be useful. So I showered and ran over there. And of course, my first question was, how do I find out where my wife is? And so they had several open lines. And we put on all those lines, anybody who has seen Tish Butler, please get back to us. And then we started the whole emergency process. And all the time in the back of my head is, you know, where's Tish? And finally, about 2 hours later, some shred of information drifted in through one of those open lines that we've seen Tish at the hospital. We saw Tish at the hospital. And in my mind, it's sort of like, you know, doing what she was doing. In fact, finding out who was injured and worse. Or was she one of the injured or worse? And so, and that's the situation I was in for another couple of hours before somebody said, yes, she was helping people in the hospital. If she was injured, it wasn't badly. She was walking around. So you can put that part of it to rest. And then we started getting pictures and information in, and it was obvious to me, looking at the building, that if I'd been in it, I would not be sitting here talking to everybody tonight, because my office was part of the U, which took the full force. Well, the full force was sort of in the middle of the U, and in the cafeteria, which is over, which as you look at the building, to the left-hand side. I was to the right-hand side on the 5th floor. But when I finally got back several days later and went into my office, you know, the entire building had come through in pieces, and the wall that I was sitting in front of was completely shredded. So I was very fortunate not to have been in the building. And from the Washington perspective, it was immediately a question of what do we do, how can we pull it together, who should go, how soon should they go, let's get material together to brief them. And I went with Sheldon? Chris, right. And he and I and a couple of other folks ended up getting thrown onto a plane on very short notice. That was after 2 days of calling around and trying to find out and notifying people who'd been injured and hurt, and trying to figure out what the emergency actions, what could Washington do to protect everything that happened. And I was, of course, thinking first and foremost about the aid mission and the people in the aid mission, but necessarily got more involved. And so we got on the plane, flew back out there, and started preparing for the further visits that would come in from all sorts of VIPs. And, you know, I guess it's just, I got to admit that I felt some resentment that rather than going around and taking care of the people who had been damaged physically, emotionally, as a result of the bombing, that we had to spend our time, writing briefing papers and sort of doing logistics for people who were going to come in. It was good that they did. Schultz came in and he was fantastic. He exuded care for the people, even though obviously his primary concern had to be geostrategic and what does this mean about our presence here and all the rest of it. But the ambassador, everybody rallied around the human side of the problem, even though they had much bigger issues that they also had to be thinking about. And so we had to relocate the aid offices, as everybody had to relocate everything. And the word from Washington, which I helped bring out, was, and it came from senior levels of Washington, and then from the ambassador, they are not gonna knock us off our feet. They are not gonna have succeeded in disturbing the rhythm of our effort here. So everything has to go right back to where it was the day before this happened. And we're gonna make sure that they don't succeed in disrupting the important work that we have to do here. And that was exactly the right message, but it was tough. It was tough. On the other hand, in a certain way, re-immersing yourself in the mission is therapeutic. So I got to say it was tough, but at the same time, it was also useful because it was something we could throw ourselves into, because the option was to sit around and be traumatized. Well, once we caught our breath and got back to work, there were two major things on our minds. One was the fact that we really did want to not have the program be damaged by what had happened. And we really worked hard to make sure that didn't happen. And I think the Lebanese respected. We dealt with very senior levels of the Lebanese government at the ministerial level in many cases, and they really were very, very sympathetic, but appreciative of the fact that the U.S. decided not to let this throw us off base, out of kilter. And that was one problem and one challenge. And the next challenge, of course, was that the real dangerous time was not over. I mean, the bombing had happened, but we still had the Marine barracks event to deal with, which fortunately didn't affect the state aid people, part of the embassy. But we did live under a fairly constant rain of rockets and small arms fire that we could hear most nights, and continued bombings of other top targets within a few blocks of where we were living. It was very enervating. It just, you kind of put the fear away, but it's always there and it's always eating at you. And I felt so tired. It was so hard we were working hard, but underneath it all was the not knowing really what was going to happen next. And I think that was probably one of the toughest periods I've had in the Foreign Service. It really was.
So you can start.
So things stayed pretty tense to the point that finally the State Department and the ambassador together decided that we really had to pull out everybody who wasn't, key to an absolutely minimal skeletal staff, and they decided to take out the aid mission. And so we packed up 1 or 2 suitcases and nothing else, and we made a run to the airport, where we were going to be picked up by a helicopter. When we got there, the helicopters were not flying because there was too much artillery going on, both ours and theirs, or from both sides, and the air above the airport just simply wasn't safe while this was going on. So we got down into one of these big sandbag bunkers and huddled down on the ground with the ground shaking, and just like in the movies, every time an artillery shell landed, a little bit of sand drifted down, and it really did look like the movies. But we got on the helicopters. Finally, there was a lull in the artillery, and we got on helicopters and we flew off to a ship offshore where we got off one helicopter and got onto another helicopter, and they took us to Cyprus, where we stayed for 2 weeks, waiting to figure out what we really were going to do. Finally, we were pulled out with the idea of it being permanent at that point. And we were back in Washington when the Marine barracks was attacked. And 241 Marines lost their lives when a large truck just loaded with ammunition drove into the lobby of the Marine barracks and exploded itself, which was the most dramatic and traumatic event of our unfortunate period of evacuating Beirut. I think Tish and I were out of the country at that point, but nonetheless, I mean, we knew a lot of those Marines, even if we didn't know the individuals involved, the commitment of the Marines to being there, and there was some uncertainty around that too, because it wasn't really clear who they were protecting, and were they just sort of a tripwire, or anyhow, it was a long story, but it was also something that it'll take me a while to get over.